I am 76 years old. I have held dying hands. I have buried people I loved. I have watched the world change so many times I stopped counting. And I can tell you, with everything I have seen, everything I have done, everything I have been through, there is only one thing that keeps me up at night. Not the husband I lost. Not the years I worked myself to the bone. Not the opportunities I missed or the money I never made. One thing, one decision, one moment, one silence that lasted so long it became permanent. And the worst part, I knew exactly what I was doing. And I did it anyway. This is the one thing I regret most. I was born in April of 1947. The war had just ended. The whole country was exhaling. 2 years of peace, barely two, and already people were trying to forget what they had been through, trying to move forward, trying to pretend that everything was going to be fine now, that the hard part was over. Nobody warned them that hard parts never really end. They just change shape. My mother told me the spring I was born was one of the most beautiful she could remember. Flowers everywhere. The kind of April that makes you believe in something, she said. She used to tell that story like it meant something, like the beauty of that particular spring was a message, a promise that the child she was bringing into the world was going to have a good life, a better life than the one she'd had. She was 23 years old when I was born. My father was 26. They had married young, the way everyone did back then. You didn't wait. You didn't think too long about it. You met someone decent, someone your family approved of, and you got married and started building something together. That was the plan. That was always the plan. We lived in a small house in Ohio, a real small house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that was barely big enough for a table and 4 chairs. My parents slept in 1 bedroom. My brother Thomas and I shared the other. Thomas was 2 years older than me. He got the top bunk because he was older. That was the rule. He was older, so he got the top bunk. End of discussion. I used to lie in that bottom bunk at night listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. Cars going by. Dogs barking somewhere down the street. The sound of the television from the living room when my father stayed up late watching the news. That steady, low murmur of the world going on around me while I was supposed to be sleeping. My father worked at a factory, pressed metal parts for automobiles. He left every morning at 5:45. I know that because I used to hear the front door close. That specific sound, that particular click of the latch, that was how I knew morning had started, even before the sun came up, even before my mother called us for breakfast. The door would close and I'd lie there for a few minutes, knowing the day had officially begun. He was a good man, my father, quiet, steady. Not a man who showed emotion easily, not a man who said I love you often, but you knew because he showed up. Every single day he showed up. Work, home, dinner, help with homework if we needed it, fix whatever was broken on the weekend. He was the most reliable person I have ever known in my life. More reliable than anyone I met after him. and I have met a lot of people. My mother was different. She was warm in a way my father wasn't built to be. She was the one who held you when you cried, the one who noticed when something was wrong before you said a word. She had this ability, I don't know how to explain it exactly, this ability to walk into a room and immediately sense the emotional temperature of everyone in it. She knew when you were sad. She knew when you were scared. She knew when you were lying, which was inconvenient when you were a child. Let me tell you, we weren't wealthy. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. We weren't poor either, not the kind of poor where you go without food or worry about the lights being shut off. But we were careful. Every dollar was accounted for. Nothing wasted. My mother could stretch a pound of ground beef into 3 dinners. She made her own bread because it was cheaper than buying it. She sewed patches onto the knees of our pants when they wore through because buying new pants was a luxury we didn't need. That's the world I grew up in. A world of careful, steady, make do with what you have. A world where you didn't complain, didn't expect more than you had, didn't ask for things that weren't coming. You worked with what was in front of you. You were grateful for it. You kept going. And I absorbed all of that. Absorbed it so deeply it became part of my bones, part of the way I saw everything. Work hard. Be responsible. Don't ask for too much. Keep going no matter what. Don't look back. Don't dwell. Don't waste time on feelings when there is always something practical that needs doing. Those lessons served me in some ways. I won't pretend they didn't. I built a life, a real life, a house and a family and a career and a community. I did things that the little girl lying in that bottom bunk could never have imagined for herself. But those lessons also cost me something. They cost me the ability to stop, to really stop and look at the people I loved and ask myself, am I treating them the way they deserve to be treated? Am I being the person I want to be, or just the person I was trained to be? I didn't ask those questions when I was young. Didn't think to ask them. Didn't know they were questions that needed asking. By the time I understood what I had been doing, it was already too late to fix it. I grew up in that house in Ohio through the 1950s. Years that the history books talk about like they were golden, like they were simple, like everyone was happy and life was easy. And the biggest problem anybody had was keeping their white picket fence painted. That is not how I remember it. I remember complexity. I remember tension underneath the surface of things that everyone pretended wasn't there. I remember rules, unspoken rules about who you were supposed to be, how you were supposed to act, what was acceptable for a girl, what was expected, what was allowed. You were supposed to be pleasant. You were supposed to be helpful. You were supposed to smile when smiling was called for, and be quiet when quiet was expected. You were not supposed to want too much. You were not supposed to say too much. You were not supposed to take up too much space or have too many opinions or be too loud or too sure of yourself. I was not naturally any of those things. That is the honest truth. I was stubborn and opinionated and too loud and entirely too sure of myself for a girl growing up in the 1950s in Ohio. My mother spent most of my childhood trying to sand down those edges, trying to make me more palatable, more appropriate, more acceptable. Not because she was cruel. She wasn't cruel. She was practical. She knew what the world expected of girls, of women, and she was trying to prepare me for it. My brother Thomas had no such preparation required. He could be loud, could argue at the dinner table, could have opinions and state them clearly, and nobody thought anything of it. He was a boy. That was simply how boys were. When I did the same things, it was a problem. It was unbecoming. It needed to be corrected. Thomas and I were close despite that difference, or maybe because of it. He never treated me like I was less than him, never talked down to me or told me I shouldn't think certain things or want certain things. He just treated me like a person, an equal, which sounds like it should be the minimum standard, and it should be. But it was rare enough that it meant everything. He was the one who told me I was smart when the world kept trying to convince me smart wasn't what I was supposed to be. He was the one who said, "You should go to college, Evelyn. You're too smart not to." He was the one I failed, but we're not there yet. That part comes later, and when it comes, you'll understand why I have spent the last 30 years trying to find a way to live with it. By the time I was 12, I had already decided two things about myself. First, I was going to be somebody. I didn't know exactly what that meant, didn't have a clear picture of it, but I knew I was going to do something with my life, going to be more than what the world seemed to think was available to girls like me. Second, I was never going to need anybody. That second decision was the dangerous one. I had watched my mother depend on my father for everything financial. Watched what that dependence meant, how it limited her choices, how it meant his word was final because his money was final. I decided I would never be in that position. I would earn my own money, make my own decisions, answer to no one. I was 12 years old and already building walls. By the time I understood what those walls had cost me, I was old enough that the damage had been done. The people who needed me to let them in had stopped knocking, and the silence left behind was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I turned 13 in 1960. The year felt electric even to a child. You could feel it, something shifting in the air, something changing in the way people talked about the future. John F. Kennedy was running for president. My father thought he was too young, too inexperienced. My mother thought he had kind eyes. I thought it didn't matter what I thought, because I wasn't old enough to vote, and I was also a girl, which seemed to count against me in all the rooms where decisions got made. But 1960 was changing things whether the adults wanted it to or not. I started high school that year, Jefferson High School. Brown brick building, 3 stories, smelled like chalk dust and floor wax, and the particular combination of too many young people in too small a space. I loved it immediately. Not the social part, not the endless navigation of who liked who and who was popular and what you had to do to be accepted. That part I could have done without entirely. I loved the learning part. I loved sitting in a classroom and being handed information, new information, things I hadn't known before. History and literature and mathematics and science. Each subject was a door opening into a room I hadn't known existed. I would come home and read ahead in my textbooks because I couldn't wait to know what came next. Thomas used to laugh at me for it, call me the little professor. He meant it kindly. It was a kindness. My English teacher in 9th grade was a woman named Mrs. Patricia Alderman. She was 30-something, dark hair always pinned up perfectly, wore reading glasses she kept perched on the end of her nose. She was the first teacher who ever looked at my writing and said something that changed me. She handed back a composition I'd written, 2 pages about what freedom meant to me. I'd written it the night before in about 45 minutes, hadn't thought much of it, just wrote what I thought. She handed it back with a note at the top. Not just a grade, a note. It said, "Evelyn, you write with a clarity and honesty that most adults never achieve. Please don't let anyone talk you out of using your voice." I read that note about 15 times standing in the hallway. Then I folded it very carefully and put it in my coat pocket and carried it home and put it in the drawer of my nightstand where I kept things that mattered. I still remember exactly where it is. In a box in my closet. 50-something years later, that note is still in a box in my closet. Some things you keep because they're the first evidence that you are real, that you exist in a way that matters, that someone sees you. Mrs. Alderman saw me in a world that was working very hard to make sure I understood my limitations. She saw past all of them to something underneath that she thought was worth preserving. I never forgot that. Never forgot what it felt like to be truly seen by someone. Which makes it all the more painful that I spent so many years of my adult life failing to do the same thing for the people who needed me to see them. But again, we'll get there. High school moved fast. 4 years that felt like 40 in some moments, and like 4 days looking back. I studied hard, harder than anyone I knew. Not because I was told to, not because my parents demanded it, but because I had decided early that education was the one thing nobody could take from you. Money could disappear, jobs could end, marriages could fail. But what you knew, what you had learned, what lived inside your mind, that was yours, permanently, irrevocably yours. Thomas graduated 2 years ahead of me, got a job at an insurance company downtown, made decent money. My parents were proud. He was doing what a young man was supposed to do. Building something, earning something, starting the process of becoming a provider. Nobody talked about college for Thomas. It wasn't that they were opposed to it. They just didn't think of it. You finished high school, you got a job, you got married, you built your life. That was the sequence. That was what was done. When I mentioned college, my mother looked at me with an expression I can only describe as gentle confusion. Like I'd said something in a foreign language, and she was trying to work out the translation. Why would you need college, Evelyn? You're going to get married. I remember standing in the kitchen while she said that. Remember the linoleum floor under my feet, the yellow wall she'd painted herself the summer before, the smell of dinner on the stove, and I remember thinking I am going to college. I don't care what anyone says. I am going. My father was more open to it than my mother. Not enthusiastic, not fully supportive, but open in the way he was open to most things I wanted, willing to hear the argument if I made it well enough. So I made it. I sat down with him one evening after dinner and I laid it out. I wanted to be a teacher. Teachers needed degrees. A degree cost money, but teachers made steady money, good money for women, respectable money, and I'd applied for a scholarship. Partial scholarship. I'd need help with the rest, but not much. He listened, didn't interrupt. When I finished, he sat there for a long moment, quiet the way he always was when he was actually thinking something through rather than just reacting. Then he said, "All right, Evelyn, if you want it that badly, we'll find a way." That was it. 6 words that changed everything. I got into Ohio State University. September 1965. I was 18 years old, and I carried one suitcase and a box of books, and that folded note from Mrs. Alderman into a dormitory room that I shared with a girl from Cincinnati named Dorothy, who had 3 times as many clothes as I did and a stuffed animal she slept with every night that she was not embarrassed about at all, which I found both startling and quietly admirable. College was everything I had hoped for and nothing like I had imagined. The freedom of it was intoxicating, real freedom, not just being away from home, though that was part of it, the freedom of ideas. You could sit in a classroom and argue with the professor if you disagreed with something, if you could back up your argument. You could read books that nobody had told you to read, think thoughts nobody had told you to think, question things that had always seemed unquestionable. I was in my element. I thrived. My grades were excellent. My professors knew my name. I joined the campus newspaper as a writer. I started attending lectures that had nothing to do with my coursework just because the topics interested me. I was the happiest I had ever been in my life, and I was 20 years old, and I thought this was how it was always going to feel. But things were happening in the world outside my library and my lecture halls, things that were impossible to ignore even if you wanted to. The Vietnam War was escalating. Every month the news was worse. Every month more boys were being sent overseas, and some of them were not coming back. And the ones who did come back were not always the same people who had left. Thomas was 22 in 1965. He got his draft notice in October of that year. I remember the phone call, my mother crying, My father's voice trying to be steady and not quite managing it. Thomas himself sounding more calm than anyone else, telling them not to worry, telling them he'd be fine, telling them it would be over before they knew it. It was not over before anyone knew it. Thomas was sent to Vietnam in early 1966. He was there for 2 years. He wrote letters. I wrote back. Long letters. The longest letters I have ever written to anyone in my life. Pages and pages about what was happening at school, what I was reading, what I was thinking, because I thought if I could fill his head with enough of the ordinary world he'd left behind, maybe it would help. Maybe it would keep him tethered. He wrote back when he could. Sometimes the letters were light, funny even. Thomas had always been able to find something to laugh about. But sometimes the letters were different, shorter, flatter, like the words were coming from further away than Vietnam, like the distance between the words and the feeling behind them was growing with each passing month. He came home in 1968, and I was so relieved. I cannot describe the relief, the physical weight of it lifting. He's home. He's safe. Everything is going to be fine now. But Thomas who came home was not entirely Thomas who had left. It would take me years to fully understand what that meant. Years to understand what he needed. Years to understand that the way I was built, practical, unsentimental, fix the problem and move forward, was exactly the wrong set of tools for what my brother needed from me. He needed me to sit with him in the dark and not try to fix anything. I never learned how to do that, not until it was too late. I graduated in 1969, got a job teaching 6th grade at an elementary school in Columbus, married a man named Robert Calloway in 1970. Robert was a good man, an engineer, steady, sensible, a little quiet, which I respected because I had grown up with a quiet father and knew that quiet men were often the ones paying the most attention. We built a life, a good life, a house in the suburbs, 2 children, a daughter named Caroline and a son named David. PTA meetings and school plays and summer vacations and Christmas mornings and all the ordinary architecture of a life well lived. And right at the center of all of it, the thing I was too busy to see clearly, the thing that was quietly coming undone while I was busy building everything else. My brother Thomas. Thomas never married. I want you to hold that fact for a moment because I think people hear it and immediately make assumptions. And the assumptions they make say more about them than about him. He never married because he never found someone who made him want to. That was the truth of it. He was particular, selective. He had standards for what he wanted in a relationship that most people he met simply did not meet. And he was not willing to settle for less just because settling was what everyone else seemed to be doing. I respected that. I told myself I respected it. But underneath the respect there was something else, something I am not proud of, a quiet judgment, a small, persistent voice in the back of my mind that said, something must be wrong with him. Normal men got married. Healthy men, well-adjusted men, Men who were functioning properly, they got married. The fact that Thomas hadn't was evidence of some damage, some wound from Vietnam or before Vietnam, something that had broken the part of him that should have wanted what everyone was supposed to want. I am telling you this because I want you to understand who I was, not who I thought I was, who I actually was. Because those two things were very different, and it took me a very long time to understand that gap. Longer than it should have. Too long. Thomas lived alone in an apartment in Columbus from 1968 onward. Small apartment, second floor of an older building, 3 blocks from a park where he liked to walk in the mornings. He had a job at a hardware store, then at a lumber yard, then back at the hardware store. Not grand employment, not the career trajectory you'd hope for someone as capable as he was. But he was good at it. He knew things about tools and materials and construction that amazed customers. He could walk you through a home repair project step by step, and you'd leave feeling genuinely confident you could do it. He liked working with his hands, liked the directness of it. Problem, solution, done. None of the complexity of human relationships and their endless ambiguity. A leaky faucet didn't have feelings. A stuck door didn't require you to say the right thing. I saw him at family gatherings, holidays, birthdays, my parents' house. Then after my parents were gone, my house. Because I was the one with the biggest dining room and the most organized approach to holiday meals. Thomas would come. He was always good company at those gatherings. Funny, attentive, wonderful with my children. Caroline adored him. She used to climb into his lap and demand stories, and he would tell her these elaborate, invented stories about animals with human problems, mice who worried too much about their cheese, bears who were afraid of honey bees, and she would listen with her whole body leaning forward, completely absorbed. He was good with children. Patient in a way he sometimes wasn't with adults. Something about children's honesty appealed to him. They said what they meant. They didn't perform. I should have paid more attention to what he was telling me through the things he chose to do and not do. But I was busy. That is the excuse I made then and the explanation I reject now because busy is a choice. Busy is a way of organizing your priorities so that certain things end up at the bottom of the list. And the things at the bottom of the list are the things that don't survive when life gets difficult. My marriage was good but required work. My children were growing and needed attention and supervision and the particular kind of energy that parenting young children demands. My career was expanding. I moved from classroom teacher to curriculum coordinator in 1978. More responsibility, more hours, more of my energy going outward into the world of work where I was capable and valued and clear on exactly what was expected of me. Home was clear too. I knew how to run a home. Robert and I had our systems, our patterns, our understanding of who handled what. It was effective. It was organized. We were good at the practical machinery of life together. What I was less good at, what I had never been particularly good at, was the space beneath the practical, the emotional undercurrent of things, the feelings that didn't have obvious solutions, that couldn't be fixed with better organization or more efficient systems. Robert understood this about me, accepted it. He was not an emotionally demanding man, which made us compatible in one sense, but may have also allowed me to avoid developing the emotional skills I needed, because he never required them of me in ways that would have forced me to build them. Thomas required them, and I failed him. It started with small distance, not dramatic, not the kind of rift you can point to and say that is where it began, just a gradual widening of the space between us, fewer phone calls, conversations that stayed on the surface because going deeper required something from me that I was always too tired or too busy or too something to give. He would call sometimes, Thomas, call in the evenings. I'd answer, we'd talk, and I can look back now and hear the moments where he was trying to say something real, and I would redirect the conversation to something safer, something practical. How's the apartment? How's work? Are you eating properly? Questions that sound like care. Questions that function as walls. Because as long as we were talking about his apartment and his work and whether he was eating properly, we didn't have to talk about whether he was sleeping, whether he was still having the nightmares he'd mentioned once, years earlier, and never mentioned again after I'd responded with a practical suggestion about sleep schedules and evening routines. Whether the war was still living in him the way it lives in some people, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, constantly, like a radio playing in a room that never goes fully silent. I think I always knew at some level, that Thomas was struggling in ways he didn't know how to name and I didn't know how to ask about. But knowing and acting on what you know are two entirely different things. And I was very good at knowing things and filing them away in a place where I didn't have to look at them. He never asked me for help directly. That's something I told myself for years as a form of comfort. He never said, Evelyn, I need you. He never said, I'm not okay. He never gave me the clear signal that would have made it impossible to look away. He was too proud for that. Too much like me in that particular way. Convinced that needing help was a weakness, that admitting you were struggling was somehow a failure of character. But he didn't have to say the words. The words were in everything else. They were in the way conversations would drop off sometimes mid-sentence, like he'd started to say something real and then thought better of it. They were in the gaps between phone calls that grew longer and longer. They were in the Christmas he didn't come to dinner because he said he had a cold. And I said, okay, feel better, and didn't think to drive over and check on him. He lived 12 minutes from my house. 12 minutes, and I didn't go. In 1981, Thomas lost his job at the lumber yard. They were downsizing. 23 people let go in a single afternoon. He called me that evening. I could hear something in his voice, a flatness. a particular kind of quiet that was different from his usual quiet. He told me what had happened, told me simply, without drama, the way he told most things. I said, well, you'll find something else. You're capable and reliable, and any employer would be lucky to have you. I said it because it was true, and because saying true things felt like the right response, like I had given him something useful. What he needed was not for me to tell him he'd find something else. What he needed was for me to say, I'm sorry. That's hard. Are you okay? And mean it. And then listen to the answer without immediately trying to solve anything. I didn't do that. I moved straight to reassurance and solutions, and nothing that required me to sit in the difficult feeling with him, because sitting in difficult feelings was not something I had ever learned to do. He found another job eventually. A different hardware store, closer to his apartment. Smaller operation, less money. He didn't complain about it. Thomas rarely complained about anything. He absorbed things which I admired, which I thought of as strength, which I now understand as something else entirely. A man who had learned that his pain was not welcome in the world and had responded by making himself as small and self-contained as possible. I made him feel that way. Not alone. The world helped, but I helped, and I will live with that for whatever time I have left. I want to say that year slowly, 1987, because that is the year I think about when I wake up at 3 in the morning and the darkness feels like it has weight. That is the year that lives in me like a splinter, too deep to remove, too present to forget. Thomas was 42. I was 40. Robert and I had been married 17 years. Caroline was 16. David was 13. I was assistant superintendent of curriculum for the school district. I had more responsibility and more respect and more business than at any other point in my life. I was, by every external measure, thriving, doing well, succeeding, and Thomas was disappearing. I didn't see it that clearly at the time. That's not entirely an excuse. I should have seen it. There were signs enough. But I want to be truthful about what I perceived and what I didn't, because honesty is the only useful thing I have left to offer. I had noticed he was thinner. Noticed it at Easter that year when he came to dinner and I saw how his shirt hung differently than it used to. He had always been lean, Thomas, but this was different. This was the thinness of someone not eating properly, not taking care of himself. I noticed it and I thought I should talk to him about that. I should make sure he's okay. And then the dinner happened and the conversation moved and the dishes needed clearing and Caroline needed a ride to her friend's house and David had homework and Robert needed to talk about something related to the house. And the thought about Thomas got folded up and put away in that mental filing cabinet where I stored things I intended to address when I had time. The phone call came in November, a Tuesday evening. I was grading papers at the kitchen table, red pen in hand, a cup of tea gone cold beside me. The phone rang and I answered it, and it was Thomas. He sounded different. I noticed it immediately, the quality of his voice. Something had been removed from it, something that I now understand was the last of his energy for pretending things were fine. He said, "Evelyn, I need to talk to you. Not how's work, not how are the kids. Just I need to talk to you," I said, "of course. What's going on?" And he started to tell me, slowly, carefully, in the way he always did things, measuring his words, making sure he was being precise. He told me he wasn't doing well. Told me he'd been struggling for a while, more than a while, for years if he was being completely honest. He told me the nightmares had never really stopped, that there were days when Vietnam felt closer than the present, more real than the kitchen table he was sitting at. He told me he'd been drinking more than he should to get to sleep, had been doing that for longer than he wanted to admit. He told me he felt like he was standing at the edge of something, and he was scared of how close he was to the edge. He was asking me for help. The man who never asked anyone for anything was asking me for help. His voice was quiet and steady and completely honest, and it was the bravest thing I ever heard him do, and I failed him. Not dramatically, not in a way I could even defend as a clear and obvious failure at the time. I didn't hang up on him. I didn't tell him he was weak or that his problems weren't real. I didn't do anything that, examined in isolation, would seem clearly cruel. But what I did was worse in its way. Worse because it was smaller, more practical, more efficiently dismissive. I went into problem-solving mode. I said, "Thomas, have you talked to a doctor? There are resources for veterans, programs specifically for what you're describing. The VA has counselors. There are support groups. You should call them. I can help you find the right phone numbers if you need them." Phone numbers. He called me to tell me he was standing at the edge, and I offered him phone numbers. I kept talking, kept solving, kept moving down the practical list of things that could be done, things that should be done. Because as long as I was moving forward through the list, I didn't have to feel the full weight of what he had just told me. Didn't have to stop and sit in the darkness with him. Didn't have to say the simple, human thing that the moment required. "I'm scared too. I love you. I am so sorry you've been carrying this. I should have seen it. I should have asked. Tell me everything. I am not going anywhere. I am right here." I didn't say any of that. I gave him a list. I told him to call the VA. I told him it would get better with the right support. I told him he was a strong person and he could get through this. And I believed all of it. That's the thing that haunts me most. I wasn't lying to him. I genuinely believed that the practical help I was pointing him toward was the right answer. I thought I was helping. I thought my efficiency was a form of love. Thomas was quiet for a moment after I finished. That Thomas quiet that I knew so well and had so often misread as okay when it was not okay at all. Then he said, "Right. Okay. Thanks, Evelyn." 3 words. The flattest 3 words I have ever heard. I said, "Call me if you need anything. I mean it." He said, "Sure. Good night." and we hung up. I finished grading my papers, drank my cold tea, went to bed. I told myself he would be fine, told myself he had the information he needed, told myself I had done what I could, told myself tomorrow I would look up those VA phone numbers and send them to him. Tomorrow, always tomorrow. I never sent the phone numbers, not because I forgot exactly, more because the next day came with its own requirements, its own list of urgent things, and Thomas's crisis, which had not visibly escalated, which had not produced a second phone call, quietly slipped down the list the way things do when you are always putting out the fire that is burning loudest. 3 weeks later, my brother William called me. 7 in the morning. I knew from the hour something was wrong. Thomas had been found in his apartment. He had been there for 2 days before the neighbor noticed. Before anyone noticed, he had been alone for 2 days, and the last real conversation we ever had was me giving him a list of phone numbers he never called. I am 76 years old. I have had 35 years to live with that night. 35 years of replaying it. 35 years of knowing exactly what I should have said and didn't say. Exactly what I should have done and didn't do. 35 years of picking up the phone and driving 12 minutes and sitting with him in whatever dark he was in instead of trying to redirect him out of it efficiently. 35 years is a long time to wish you could go back. You cannot go back. That is what I want you to understand before I finish this story. You cannot go back. The conversation you don't have today does not wait for you. It ends. People end. And when they end, what you said or didn't say is permanent. Final, irreversible. Nothing is more permanent than an opportunity to love someone that you didn't take. I am not telling you this story because I want your pity. I want to be clear about that from the beginning of this final section, because I've spent enough years drowning in my own self. Pity to know it doesn't help anyone, not you, not the people you've lost, not yourself. Self-pity is just another way of making someone else's story about you, and I have done enough of that already. I am telling you this story because I think you might need to hear it, not because your story is my story. It probably isn't. The specific geography of regret is always unique. Your version of the mistake I made will look different, be shaped by different circumstances, involve different people. Maybe it's a parent you let too much time pass with. Maybe it's a friend you let drift away after a misunderstanding that neither of you was willing to move toward first. Maybe it's a child who is struggling right now, and you know it and you are waiting, like I waited, for a clearer signal, a more obvious moment, a less inconvenient time to really stop and ask how they are. There is no clearer signal coming. That is what I know now that I wish I had known at 40. The signal that Thomas gave me in November of 1987 was as clear as it gets. He used the words. He said, "I need to talk to you." He said, "I'm not doing well." He said, "I'm scared." He handed me everything I needed to understand what was happening. And I took that information and ran it through the only system I had, practical, efficient, solution-focused, and I produced an output that was technically helpful and humanly catastrophic. The system was the problem. The way I was built, the way I had built myself, was the problem. And the hardest thing about understanding that I built myself that way with the best intentions. I was trying to be strong. I was trying to be capable. I was trying to be the person who handled things. I had spent my entire life being the person who handled things, and I thought that was a gift I was giving to everyone around me. It was. Sometimes, for some things, some people in my life genuinely benefited from having someone who could organize and solve and manage and push forward without being paralyzed by feeling. But Thomas didn't need me to handle things. Thomas needed me to feel things with him, out loud, messily and imperfectly and without a solution at the end. And I didn't know how to do that. I had spent so long treating feelings as problems to be solved that I had lost, or maybe never fully developed, the ability to simply be present in a painful feeling without trying to make it stop. That is what I regret most. Not the specific words I said on that specific night, though I regret those too. What I regret at the deepest level is the 30 years of small moments before that night where I could have been building a different kind of relationship with my brother, where I could have been practicing the kind of presence he needed, where I could have been learning to sit with difficult feelings instead of filing them away, where I could have been creating the kind of safety between us that might have meant he called earlier, before the edge got so close. I went to therapy after Thomas died. Not immediately. It took me 2 years to get there, 2 years of functioning, of going to work and raising my children and keeping the house and doing all the things that needed doing. 2 years of waking up at 3 in the morning and lying in the dark laying November 1987 with the lights off and the house quiet and nowhere to put the weight of what I was carrying. Robert finally said to me, "Evelyn, you need to talk to someone." Not me, someone who knows how to help with this. I didn't want to. Of course I didn't want to. Asking for help was not something I did easily. Admitting I couldn't manage something alone felt like failure. But I was desperate enough by then, hollow enough that I went. The therapist was a woman named Dr. Sandra Green. 40s calm. The kind of calm that isn't absence of feeling, but is instead feeling very well managed. She had a small office with plants in the window and a box of tissues on the table that I resented the presence of for the first 3 sessions. I told her everything, the list. The papers I went back to grading, the cold tea, all of it. She listened. She didn't try to make it better. She didn't tell me I had done what I could, didn't tell me it wasn't my fault, didn't offer me the easy absolution I both wanted and knew I didn't deserve. She just listened. And then she said something that stayed with me. She said, "Evelyn, you responded to your brother's pain with the only tools you had." The grief work now is figuring out why those were the only tools you had, and what it would mean to build different ones, different tools. That framing changed something for me. It took the question from why was I a bad sister, which had no productive answer, to what was I missing? What did I never learn? What do I need to understand that I don't yet understand? I spent 3 years in therapy answering those questions. Some answers came easily. Some required excavation, required going back to the kitchen with the yellow walls and the cold linoleum and the father who showed love by showing up and the mother who held you, but also tried to sand down the parts of you that were inconvenient. Required understanding that the tools I had were the tools I was given, and the tools I was given were the ones available to people like my parents in a time and place that valued function over feeling, doing over being, strength over vulnerability. I don't blame them. That would be too easy and also wrong. They were doing what they knew to do, what they had been taught to do. The chain of inheritance goes back further than any of us can fully trace. But understanding the origin of the problem did not dissolve the problem. Understanding why you are the way you are does not automatically make you different. That part takes more. It takes practice. It takes choosing over and over to do the uncomfortable thing instead of the efficient thing, to sit with feeling instead of solving it, to say, I don't know how to fix this, but I am not going anywhere. Instead of reaching for the list of practical steps, I got better at it, slowly, imperfectly, with a great deal of failure along the way. I got better with Caroline, had to. She went through her own difficult years in her 20s, and I came close, too close, to doing to her what I had done to Thomas. Close enough that I could feel myself sliding back into the old pattern, the safe, useless pattern of solving instead of being present. But this time I caught it. This time I stopped mid-sentence, and I said, I'm doing it again. I'm trying to fix something that doesn't need fixing. What you need is for me to hear you. And I heard her, really heard her, even though it was hard, even though it required me to hold feelings I didn't know what to do with, even though there were moments in those conversations where I had to physically resist the urge to reach for a practical solution. She got through it. She is 40, 9 years old now, my daughter. And she is one of the most emotionally intelligent people I know. Somewhere in there she found the capacity I never had. Maybe she built it herself. Maybe I gave her just enough of it to build the rest. I don't know, but she is okay, more than okay. And that is a gift I didn't fully earn, but am grateful for every day. David, too. He and I found our way to something real, something honest. It took longer. He was more like me, more closed, more efficient. We had to work at it. We still do, but we work at it. Robert died in 2015. 34 years of marriage, good years, mostly. He was sick for about 8 months at the end. Lung cancer. Never smoked a day in his life, which made it seem particularly unreasonable, though cancer doesn't concern itself with fairness. During those 8 months, I learned more about being present with someone than in all the years before them combined. I sat with him. Just sat. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. Sometimes he was in pain, and there was nothing to do about the pain, and I sat with him in it instead of leaving the room to go find something practical to do, because I couldn't bear to feel helpless. I felt helpless. I stayed anyway. I kept thinking of Thomas during those months. Kept thinking this is what he needed. This exact thing. This willingness to stay in the room when there are no solutions. To be a witness to someone's suffering instead of a manager of it. I could do it for Robert. I had learned. Too late for Thomas, but I had learned. That has to mean something. I have to believe that has to mean something. I am 76 years old. I don't know how much time I have left. Nobody does. But I know what I want to do with it. I want to keep practicing the thing I almost learned too late. I want to keep sitting with people instead of solving them. Keep saying, tell me more, instead of here is what you should do. Keep choosing presence over efficiency every time I get a choice. And I want to tell everyone who is listening, and I mean everyone, that the people in your life who are struggling are not always going to tell you clearly. They are not always going to say the words. They will say them in other ways, in the gaps in conversation, in the calls they make at unusual hours, in the thinness you notice and file away for later. Later is not guaranteed. I need you to understand that. Really understand it. Not the way you understand things that apply to other people, but the way you understand things that are true about your own life, your own people, your own right now. 12 minutes. That is how far away my brother lived. 12 minutes. And I found 12,000 reasons not to drive it until it was too late to drive it for any reason that mattered. Don't count on more time. Don't count on a clear signal. Don't count on the right moment presenting itself neatly with enough space in the schedule to accommodate a hard conversation. Make the time. Make the call. Drive the 12 minutes. That is all I know. After 76 years, that is the most important thing I know.